Our next speaker has making his way to the stage is Raf Gibieta, and I think I've pronounced it right. We've been practicing in the hallway for some time, and I'm sure I've got it wrong. Raf comes to us from New South Wales. You'll be talking to us about small increases in speed and whether or not they do or don't affect crash outcomes. But before we do that, I've got another clicker pad question for you. Stopping distance at 60 kilometres an hour versus 50 kilometres an hour increases by how many metres? When the signal comes up, please enter the number that best represents your answer. All right, so if the question is reducing speed by 10 kilometres an hour, the number of metres you think ought to be, how close are we on that?
Well, reasonably. It's pretty good to see that there are informed people here, certainly. Yeah, pretty close.
All right. Well, look, we've got a video clip that talks about stopping distance. Perhaps we could play that and then we can come back and talk about the impact afterwards.
Two identical cars, one travelling at 60, the other at 65. A sudden change in the road ahead, and both drivers first react, and then, a moment later, they brake. In the last 5 metres of braking, you wipe off half your speed. So this car is still doing 32 k's when it hits. This one also hits, but only at 5 k's. So no matter how good a driver you are, 5 k's difference up there makes 27 k's difference down here.
All right, where can we go with that sort of information, Raf?
Assuming you're an average person, in other words, you have a perception reaction time roughly of about 1.5 seconds, and even the best car racing drivers or very sharp people have similar perception reaction times. That's been tested in laboratories, roughly 1.5 seconds. So by the time you perceive, work out there's a hazard, and then you start to brake, you've already travelled 16.7 metres per second times your 1.5 seconds. So perception reaction time is 25 metres at 60 kilometres per hour, and then 20 metres braking. So the braking's less. And likewise, at 50 kilometres per hour, the perception reaction time, you've travelled 21 metres at a speed of 13.9 metres per second. But your braking distance is only 14 metres, it's less. So that's why we're starting to look at new technology in terms of the Mercedes, the Volvos, all these top-end vehicles. They've got that 1.5 seconds and that wonderful long distance in which for a computer to perceive much faster than you can and to brake that car a lot sooner. And that new technology is starting to come in.
Have you obviously recreated crashes and that sort of stuff to analyse some of the data?
Yes, I have, and in fact I think you'll find, if we can bring up one of the slides, I think this is a particular incident which involved a pedestrian which was hurt, seriously hurt, and wound up in hospital, had a head injury. You can see the skid marks there. And so what I did is I tried to reconstruct this crash and got out in a car with low beam headlights, and there, believe it or not, at this particular intersection, which is further up, you can see the building on the left where those lights are on the left, and that's where the intersection is. If you put on your high beam, you can see the pedestrian. So this is at 36 metres away, and that's on low beam. If I had the other slide which had the high beam on, you would see that pedestrian on high beam. And I'm sure a number of you have experienced that in the country where you've turned your light on. Then the next slide shows the pedestrian at 20, and we're just starting to perceive that pedestrian. They've got light coloured jeans on. So if they were wearing dark clothing, you wouldn't see that pedestrian. So that's at 20 metres, and then at 14 metres, you see the pedestrian. Now, let's reconstruct that crash, shall we? Is it possible to brake in time if you're travelling at 50 kilometres per hour, which is the speed limit in that area? The car's travelling at about 14 metres per second. In 1.5 seconds, it's travelled 21 metres. It's not possible to perceive and react in time. In other words, you hit the pedestrian at 50 kilometres per hour, which is equivalent to falling off a 2-storey building. So in other words, higher than what all of our folks are up there, probably from the roof. Imagine yourselves falling without bracing yourselves or bending your knees or whatever, just being hit and struck. So that's the sort of equivalent in terms of energy. At 40 kilometres per hour, the car's travelling at around 11 metres per second. It's travelled 17 metres by the time you perceive and react. And then the car will brake for about another 3 metres and reduce its speed to about 33 kilometres per hour before it hits. So in other words, it's equivalent to someone falling off the roof of their house. In other words, if I got one of you up there to sort of just fall to the ground here, that would be equivalent to what would be the terms of energy. Now, if we go to 30 kilometres per hour, it is 1.5 seconds. At 30 kilometres per hour, you've travelled 8 metres. It's travelling 8 metres per second. You've travelled 13 metres in 1.5 seconds. And the car brakes for 7 metres, needs only 6, so you stop in time. And that's why Europe has a speed limit of 30 kilometres per hour, for that reason.
So this is all about being able to see beyond the limit of the low beam lights.
Absolutely. And it's all to do with reducing severity of impact. So even in daylight, when we strike a pedestrian at 50 kilometres per hour, the chance of them surviving is somewhere in the order of around about, it's about 40% risk of them being killed. If we come down to 30%, it's about 10% of them being, risk of them being killed. It depends also on the age and fitness of the person. If I got hit by a car at 30 kilometres per hour, I'd probably be killed. But it's a lot to do with that as well.
Is it fair to say that it's a linear if I go up by a small amount of speed?
It's non-linear, and it's actually exponential, and that's the problem that we're dealing with. The equation is v squared equals the velocity squared equals 2 times the acceleration times the distance, and it's that v squared that is doing it to us and exacerbating the issue.
Right. Well, thank you. We'll see if there's some questions from the floor.
You've said that on average people take 1.5 seconds to react. I'm assuming that's also somewhat a bell curve with racing car drivers perhaps being at the front and other people being at the back, people like perhaps that are influenced by alcohol, perhaps elderly, perhaps people that haven't been experienced to that sort of thing. That percentage of people that would be at the lower end, what's the risk of those sort of people being on the road even at 60 kilometres an hour?
Older people tend to take longer, and in fact we've done some studies where someone's taken even up to five seconds to perceive and react. So if you're influenced by alcohol or you've been smoking some strange drugs, then you're going to have longer and extended perception reaction times, and that's the whole point.
So should there then be a large focus on the end of the bell curve as well as the 5 kilometres an hour extra?
I guess that's a human issue that we might need to delve into a little bit later, Ref.
I would suggest, yes.
All right.
But you're right, yes.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, and thank you, Ref.